The confirmation email came to my inbox because I had booked the flight. That is the detail I keep returning to. Not the name I found in the passenger list. Not the hotel reservation for a double room on a trip I was told was solo. The detail I keep returning to is that he had asked me to book it. 6 years of managing his travel, his preferences, his loyalty numbers, his seat selections, and so when this particular trip came up, a 4-day conference in Nashville he mentioned on a Tuesday morning over coffee, it didn't occur to either of us that asking me to handle the logistics was anything other than the ordinary rhythm of our marriage. He handed me his card. I opened the browser. I booked the flight. The confirmation landed in my inbox at 11:14 a.m. I glanced at it, noted the departure time, forwarded it to his email, and went back to the brief I was reviewing for work. I am a senior paralegal at a mid-size litigation firm in Charlotte. I review documents for a living. I notice what doesn't fit. I didn't notice until 3 days later, when the airline sent an automated update about a gate change and I opened the email to forward it, and saw, in the passenger details, a name that was not mine. Lauren Tate. Seat 14B. 1 row behind my husband. I set my coffee cup down. I read the name again. I closed the email, opened it, read it a third time. Then I sat very still at my kitchen table for approximately 4 minutes, which I know because I watched the microwave clock. And then I did what I do when something doesn't fit. I opened a new spreadsheet. My name is Meredith Calloway. I am 34 years old. I have been married to Daniel Calloway for 6 years, together for 8, and for most of that time I would have told you, honestly and without performance, that we had a good marriage. Not a perfect one. Not the kind of marriage that gets written about. The ordinary, sturdy, workable kind where two people build something together and the building is sometimes hard and sometimes easy and is always, underneath it all, a choice you keep making. Daniel is a regional sales director for a medical device company. He travels frequently, has always traveled frequently, and the travel has always been part of the architecture of our life together. I manage more of the household than he does. I make more of the scheduling decisions. I coordinate more of the logistics. This was not a resentment for me, it was a division of labor that made sense given our respective capacities and schedules, and I had chosen it with open eyes. I had a career I was proud of. A house I had helped design the renovation of. A savings account I tracked carefully. A retirement fund. A marriage I believed in. Lauren Tate. Seat 14B. I want to tell you what the name meant to me in that first moment, because it is important to understand the specific texture of that recognition. It was not a stranger's name. I had heard it once, 7 months earlier, at a company holiday party. Daniel had introduced her as a new account manager out of the Atlanta office. She was in her late 20s, polished in the particular way of people who have recently been promoted and are still wearing their ambition visibly. She had shaken my hand and said something pleasant and I had thought nothing of it. I thought something of it now. The spreadsheet I opened that Tuesday morning became the most important document of the next 4 months. I want to be precise about what I did and did not do in those first hours, because the order of operations mattered. I did not confront Daniel. I did not call him. I did not text Lauren Tate or look her up on social media or do any of the things that the panicked version of this situation would call for. I am a paralegal. I have spent 11 years watching cases won and lost on the quality of documentation. I understood, in the cold clear part of my mind that was already running ahead of the emotional part, that whatever I was going to do next needed to be built on something solid. I pulled up the airline account. Daniel and I shared a household travel profile, his idea, 3 years ago, efficiency. I had access to the booking history. I went back 12 months. Nashville was not the first trip with a companion. There had been a conference in Atlanta in February. A training in Dallas in April. A client dinner in Chicago in June that Daniel had described to me as 2 nights, which the hotel confirmation, still sitting in the shared account inbox, because we had a system, because we were organized, because I had built a life on the assumption that systems were trustworthy, I showed as 3. I noted each one. Date, city, hotel name, number of nights billed versus number of nights reported. I did not yet know if Lauren Tate had been on each of those trips. I made a column for that and left it blank. Then I went to work, because I had a deposition summary due by 4 o'clock and I was not going to let my life fall apart at the expense of my professional obligations. That is not stoicism. That is the specific discipline of someone who understands that the world does not pause for personal catastrophe, and that the best thing you can do in the middle of one is to keep your external life completely intact while you figure out what you are actually dealing with. Daniel came home at 6:30. I had made dinner. We ate at the kitchen table and talked about ordinary things, his day, my brief, a plumbing issue in the upstairs bathroom. He asked if I had forwarded the gate change notification. I said I had. He thanked me. I watched his face across the table with the careful attention of someone who is learning a new language and is not yet sure which sounds are meaningful. He looked exactly like himself. Daniel and I shared a household travel profile, his idea, 3 years ago, efficiency. I had access to the booking history. I went back 12 months. Nashville was not the first trip with a companion. There had been a conference in Atlanta in February. A training in Dallas in April. A client dinner in Chicago in June that Daniel had described to me as 2 nights, which the hotel confirmation, still sitting in the shared account inbox, because we had a system, because we were organized, because I had built a life on the assumption that systems were trustworthy, I showed as 3. I noted each one. Date, city, hotel name, number of nights billed versus number of nights reported. I did not yet know if Lauren Tate had been on each of those trips. I made a column for that and left it blank. Then I went to work, because I had a deposition summary due by 4 o'clock and I was not going to let my life fall apart at the expense of my professional obligations. That is not stoicism. That is the specific discipline of someone who understands that the world does not pause for personal catastrophe, and that the best thing you can do in the middle of one is to keep your external life completely intact while you figure out what you are actually dealing with. Daniel came home at 6:30. I had made dinner. We ate at the kitchen table and talked about ordinary things, his day, my brief, a plumbing issue in the upstairs bathroom. He asked if I had forwarded the gate change notification. I said I had. He thanked me. I watched his face across the table with the careful attention of someone who is learning a new language and is not yet sure which sounds are meaningful. He looked exactly like himself. That was the part that stayed with me longest, in the weeks that followed. He looked exactly like the person I had married, eating dinner at a table we had chosen together in a house we had renovated together, in a life I had believed was real. And I sat across from him and smiled when the conversation called for smiling, and I thought about a spreadsheet with empty columns that I was going to fill in. I called my closest friend, Joanna, on Wednesday morning from my car in the firm's parking garage before I went in. Joanna has been my friend since college, is brutally practical, and had met Daniel 40 times and liked him without ever quite trusting him in the way that certain perceptive people withhold the final degree of trust without being able to explain why. I told her what I had found. She was quiet for 11 seconds, I counted, and then she said, "Do not tell him you know." Not yet. Do you have access to the credit card statements? We have a joint card for household expenses, I said. And he has a company card I am not on. Start with what you have, she said. And call a lawyer before you do anything else. I called Patricia Ngozi that afternoon. Patricia is a family law attorney who had been referred to me 2 years earlier by a colleague at my firm whose divorce she had handled with what he described as surgical efficiency. Her office was 12 minutes from mine. She had an opening Thursday at noon. I came with the spreadsheet printed. 12 months of travel history, the discrepancies I had identified, the passenger confirmation with Lauren Tate's name highlighted in yellow. Patricia read through it without expression, the particular practice neutrality of someone who has been handed versions of this document hundreds of times and treats each one with the same methodical respect. She looked up. How much access do you have to shared financial accounts? I walked her through it. Joint checking, joint savings, joint credit card, the travel profile, the household email account we used for shared subscriptions, and logistics. She nodded slowly. She made a note. Do you have any reason to believe he is moving money you are not aware of? I paused. The honest answer was that I had not looked yet. I told her that. Look, she said simply. She closed her folder. Document everything you find. Do not confront him. Do not access anything you don't have legitimate joint access to. Bring me what you find and we will talk about next steps. She said it with the calm authority of someone who had given this exact instruction many times and understood why it was the most important one. The instinct, when you have been betrayed, is to act immediately. To confront, to expose, to make the damage visible. That instinct, in the context of a divorce proceeding, can cost you everything. I left her office and went back to work. What I found in the joint credit card statements took me 2 evenings to fully understand. I want to be careful here, because some of this is complicated and the complication is part of the story. Daniel and I had agreed when we married that household expenses came from the joint card and that personal expenses came from individual accounts. This had been his suggestion, framed as clean and simple, and I had agreed because it was clean and simple. What I had not tracked, because I had trusted the system, was the specific category breakdown of what was being charged to the joint card. Over the previous 14 months, there were charges I could not account for. A jewelry store in Atlanta I had never visited, $560, in March. A hotel minibar charge on a night Daniel had told me he was staying with a colleague, $48 of room service for 2. A florist in Nashville, where he was flying next week, $220, placed 3 days before his departure. Flowers. He had ordered flowers to be waiting in Nashville. I sat at the kitchen table at 11:30 at night with my laptop and a glass of water and looked at the florist charge and felt something settle in my chest. Not grief. Not rage. Something older and quieter. The feeling of a person who has been holding a question for a long time and has finally, against every hope to the contrary, received the answer. I screenshotted everything. I organized it by date in the spreadsheet. I added a column for category and a column for what Daniel had told me he was doing on the relevant date, cross-referenced against the text messages I had gone back and read, carefully, from the same periods. Staying late at the office, read one text from a night when the joint card showed a restaurant charge 40 minutes from our house at 7:45 p.m. flight delayed, read another, from a trip to Atlanta when the hotel record showed check-in at standard time. Small lies. The kind that are invisible when you are not looking and unmistakable when you are. I sent the updated spreadsheet to Patricia on a Thursday morning. She called me that afternoon. This is a strong evidentiary picture, she said. Not conclusive on its own, but strong. She paused. I want you to think carefully about what you want the outcome to be before we go any further, because the answer to that question shapes everything we do next. I had been thinking about it for 9 days. I told her the answer. I want out, I said. And I want what I am entitled to. Every dollar, every asset, every piece of this life that my income and my labor built. I do not want a conversation about whether he is sorry. I do not want a counselor's office. I want a clean exit with documentation that makes the alternative to fair settlement not worth considering. Patricia was quiet for a moment. That, she said, is the clearest answer I have heard in a long time. Let me tell you what we need. Daniel left for Nashville on a Wednesday morning. I drove him to the airport at 6 a.m. I had his bag in the trunk, his coffee in the cup holder, his boarding pass pulled up on his phone. He kissed me at the departure's curb and said he would call that evening and that he loved me. I said I loved him too. I waited until his figure disappeared through the sliding doors. Then I drove home, went upstairs to the home office we shared, and spent the next 3 hours doing what Patricia had instructed. Our home had been purchased jointly in year 2 of our marriage. The down payment had come from both our savings accounts, mine constituting 61% of the total. The mortgage was in both names. The renovation we had completed 18 months ago, new kitchen, refinished floors, the back deck, had been funded partially through a home equity line of credit that we both held. I pulled the original purchase documents. The mortgage statements. The HELEC records. I had known approximately where these were, because I was the person who filed things in this house. I photographed each document with my phone, uploaded them to the secure cloud folder Patricia had set up for our case, and labeled them by category. Then I opened Daniel's desk drawer. I want to be precise about this, because Patricia had been precise with me. I had access to the home office. The desk was shared workspace. The drawer was unlocked. What I was looking for was not hidden. What I found was not something I broke any boundary to find. It was a notebook. Black cover, the kind sold in any office supply store. Daniel had always kept one, notes from calls, to-do lists, the occasional personal reflection. I had seen this notebook before and had never looked inside it because I had trusted him. I looked inside it now. The entries were intermittent. Dates and brief notes, the kind of shorthand a person uses when they are writing for themselves. Most of it was professional, deal notes, client names, pricing targets. But there were entries that were not professional. March 14th, Elle says she wants to tell people. I told her not yet. Timing matters. May 3rd, harder to keep everything separate. Need to think about the longer plan. July 22nd, she asked about the house. I said it was complicated. She asked about the house. I photographed every page. I uploaded it to the folder. I labeled it. Then I put the notebook back exactly where I had found it, went downstairs, and made myself breakfast. She asked about the house. Our house. The house I had contributed 61% of the down payment to. The house whose renovation I had project managed for 7 months while working full-time. The house that Lauren Tate, in an unlocked notebook in a shared home office, had apparently been asking about. I called Patricia. She filed the following Monday. Daniel was served at his office at 2:17 in the afternoon by a process server named Gerald, who was, according to Patricia, entirely professional and entirely unmoved by the reaction he received. I was in a client meeting when it happened. I had scheduled the meeting specifically for that afternoon, because I did not want to be sitting at home alone when Daniel found out. When the meeting ended at 3:30, I had 4 missed calls from him and a text that read, Meredith. Please call me immediately. We need to talk. I showed the text to Patricia, who was sitting across from me in her office. I had gone there directly after the meeting. She read it. She noted the timestamp. She said, do not call him. All communication goes through me from this point forward. He called 6 more times that evening. I let each one go to voicemail. I sat in the house we had bought together, on the couch we had chosen together, and I did not answer. Not because I was being cruel, but because Patricia had explained something to me in our very first meeting that I had held on to like a handhold in the weeks since. The person who controls the information controls the proceeding, she had said. Right now, he does not know what we have. Every conversation you have with him before the discovery process is a conversation in which you might tell him something we need him not to know. Silence is not unkind. Silence is strategic. I sat on the couch. I did not answer. I watched the calls come in and go dark, and I thought about a florist in Nashville and a notebook entry about the house and the specific weight of 6 years of believing something that was not entirely true. Around 9 p.m., he stopped calling. At 9:22, he texted, I'm coming home. I forwarded the text to Patricia. She replied within 4 minutes. I'll have an interim communication protocol to you by morning. For tonight, you are allowed to be in the house. He is allowed to be in the house. You do not have to speak. He came through the door at 10:40. I was already in the guest room, door closed. I heard him move through the house. I heard him stop outside the guest room door. I heard him put his hand on the door handle, and then I heard him let go of it. He slept in the master bedroom. I slept in the guest room. In the morning I was showered and dressed and out the door by 7:15, before he came downstairs. That was the only night we spent in the same house after the filing. The discovery process took 11 weeks. I want to tell you what 11 weeks of discovery looks like from the inside, because it is not dramatic in the way that people imagine. It is methodical. It is paper-heavy. It is the work of two attorneys requesting documents and reviewing documents and cross-referencing documents, and it moves at the pace of institutional procedure, which is slow and deliberate and ultimately, if your documentation is solid, irreversible. Patricia had requested 3 years of financial records, all accounts, joint and individual. Daniel's attorney, a man named Robert Hess who had 20 years in family law and the reputation of someone who knew when a case was worth fighting and when it was not, complied with the request in stages. What the records showed was more than I had found on my own. The joint credit card charges I had documented were confirmed. The hotel discrepancies were confirmed. And there was something Patricia had suspected based on the notebook entry that she had not told me about until the records arrived, because she had not wanted to raise my expectations. Daniel had opened a separate savings account 14 months ago. A personal account, at a different bank from our household accounts, with an opening deposit of $12,000. The account had been funded with transfers from his personal checking, money from his salary that, per our marital agreement, was to go into household savings after personal expenses were covered. Over 14 months, the account held a balance of $31,000. Patricia explained what this meant in terms I already understood. In many states, assets accumulated during a marriage using marital income are considered marital property regardless of whose name is on the account. North Carolina, where we lived, was an equitable distribution state. The $31,000 was ours. So was the $47,000 in his company's deferred compensation program, which Patricia's forensic accountant, a woman named Sheila Obi who had been doing this for 19 years and who reviewed the records with the focused attention of someone genuinely interested in the puzzle, had identified through the payroll documentation. $78,000 that Daniel had been quietly building while I managed a household on the assumption that we were building something together. Robert Hess called Patricia on a Thursday in November. Patricia called me 20 minutes later. They want to talk settlement, she said. I had not spoken to Daniel directly since the night he came home to a closed guest room door. We had communicated through attorneys, which is the particular alienation of a legal proceeding, the person you once told everything to become someone whose name appears in documents as respondent. The settlement conversation happened in a conference room at Patricia's office. Daniel was across the table with Robert Hess. I sat beside Patricia with my hands folded on the table and looked at my husband of 6 years and felt something I had not expected. Clarity. Not anger. Not grief. The specific, grounding clarity of a person who has spent 3 months doing the work of understanding their own situation, and who is sitting down to finish it. Daniel looked tired. He looked like someone who had been carrying something heavy and had run out of ways to pretend he wasn't. He had tried to reach me twice through Hess with what Patricia described as personal messages, things he wanted to say to me that were not relevant to the legal proceeding. She had declined to pass them along, and I had not asked what they said. Hess made the opening offer. The house, proposed to be sold with proceeds split 60-40 in my favor. The joint savings and checking accounts divided equally. His personal savings account, the $31,000, classified as separate property. Patricia let him finish. Then she opened her folder. She walked through the marital contribution analysis. My 61% of the down payment. The renovation project management I had performed, which she had quantified at the market rate for a project manager with equivalent responsibility, $4,200, conservative. The household management contributions, scheduling, logistics, the labor of running a shared life. She did not inflate these. She documented them. Then she presented the deferred compensation analysis. Robert Hess looked at the number. He looked at Daniel. Something passed between them that I recognized as the specific communication of an attorney telling his client that the number they had hoped to avoid discussing was, in fact, unavoidable. Daniel looked at the table. She is entitled to half the deferred compensation, Patricia said. She is entitled to the personal savings account under equitable distribution. She is entitled to 63% of the net home sale proceeds based on documented contribution. And she is entitled to attorney's fees, which I will be requesting given the circumstances that necessitated this filing. She closed her folder. Hess asked for a recess. They were in the hallway for 22 minutes. I know the time because I watched the clock on Patricia's conference room wall and thought about a florist in Nashville and a notebook and a name on an airline confirmation. And I thought about the version of myself who had been sitting at a kitchen table 3 months ago with a coffee going cold and a gate change notification on her screen, and I thought about what that woman had done next. She had opened a spreadsheet. Hess came back in. He said they would accept equitable distribution of the deferred compensation and the personal savings account. He said Daniel was prepared to agree to 62% of the home sale proceeds. He said Daniel wanted to convey something personally. Patricia looked at me. I shook my head. Not necessary, I said. Daniel looked up for the first time. His eyes found mine across the table and he held them there for a moment, long enough that I understood he was looking for something, forgiveness, or recognition, or the version of me that might still be reachable. I looked back at him with the steady, even attention of someone who has nothing left to prove and nowhere left to be wounded. I looked away first. But not because he had won anything. Because I was done. The settlement was signed 6 weeks later. The house sold in 43 days, it was a good market, and I had maintained it well, because I had maintained everything well. My share of the proceeds, combined with the savings account distribution and my portion of the deferred compensation, came to $214,000. I want to say that number plainly, because I spent a long time not saying numbers plainly. $214,000. The documented, legally established value of my contribution to a life I had built with someone who had been quietly building something else on the side. I found an apartment 14 minutes from my office. 3rd floor, south-facing windows, a kitchen with good light. I signed the lease in January and moved in on a Saturday with Joanna's help and 2 carloads of things that were mine, just mine, with no negotiation required. Lauren Tate, I learned through a mutual professional connection some months later, had transferred to a different regional office shortly after the filing became known within Daniel's company. The conference in Nashville had apparently been the beginning of a plan. The notebook had suggested as much, that had not survived contact with a process server and 11 weeks of discovery. I do not know what happened to Daniel after the settlement. I do not need to. His life is his business in a way it was not when it was also my life, and the specific freedom of that boundary is something I am still learning to appreciate. Patricia sent me a handwritten note after the final documents were filed. It said, "You did the hard part. The rest was just paperwork." She was right, and she was also being modest, because the paperwork was substantial. But I understood what she meant. The hard part was the Tuesday morning at the kitchen table. The decision, in the 4 minutes I watched the microwave clock, not to react, but to document. Not to confront, but to understand. Not to grieve before I had the full picture, because grief requires accuracy to be useful, and I did not yet have accurate information. The hard part was every dinner I made and every flight I forwarded and every morning I drove to work and did my job completely while running a separate and entirely private operation in the margins of my own life. The hard part was holding the thing I knew while continuing to look like someone who didn't know it yet. People ask me, Joanna asks me, sometimes, in the shorthand of people who were there, whether it was worth it. The months of documentation. The discipline of not acting until I was ready. The specific loneliness of knowing something you cannot yet say. I tell her the same thing every time. He asked me to book the flight, I say. I did. I just made sure to keep a copy of the confirmation. If you are somewhere in America right now watching this, I would love to know where. Drop it in the comments, and if this story stayed with you, you know what to do. There are more where this came from, and every single one of them is worth staying for.